Go.
No? Hello everyone, I'm Rhiannon Evanine. I'm your host for Friday, and this is the Social Justice Hour at TYT Community. Alright, it is once again Friday night on TYT Community, time for the Social Justice Hour, hosted by Rhiannon Evanine, yours truly, and also my co-host who's right here with me, Jeff Waldorf.
Hey, howdy.
And our longtime libertarian correspondent, Sean Fitzgerald, is also here with us. Thank you, Sean.
Good to be here.
And tonight we have some great stories for you this evening. We have stories about Louisiana and a new gun law that's going into place. We have a story from California about a small town with their version of trying to eliminate homelessness. And then we will go into a story about wages for tipped employees and a new trend that's happening in New York City particularly. And then finally we will end the story with we will end the evening with a lovely story about Fox News host Tucker Carlson, charming individual. But first, let's go to Louisiana. On Tuesday, Louisiana House legislators unanimously passed a bill to bar gun possession for those under state law for anyone who has been convicted of a domestic violence offense. The measure has already passed the state Senate and is now set to go in front of Governor Bobby Jindal for signing, which he is expected to do. This is rather surprising, but this has begun sort of what has become a trend, as last month in Wisconsin, Governor Scott Walker also signed a similar law requiring convicted domestic offenders to hand over their firearms. Before that, Washington State also passed a law barring gun ownership of anyone who is presented with a domestic violence-related restraining order, and this has come after a decade of fighting with the NRA. However, it seems that recently in the last year, the NRA has quietly changed their position on these laws. This is one way, presumably, that the NRA is trying to reach out and appeal to women. This also is taking place after several significantly tragic events that have occurred involving guns and domestic violence recently, including a 39-year-old woman who was recently shot and killed by her abusive husband, and her name was Gwen Cox Sally, and she was shot and killed before in a murder-suicide. While the NRA may seem to lend their support to these laws right now, they are also spending a significant amount of effort in order to soften these laws. For example, in Washington State, where that law was signed violators originally had to surrender their firearms to either a government official or to a firearms dealer. Now, under the law, they are allowed to simply surrender or hand over their firearms to a friend, which seems to not make sense. I mean, then they can just borrow the gun to shoot their friend instead. You know, just kidding, because that would never happen, right? But anyway, domestic violence is currently one of the main concerns surrounding gun ownership in this country right now, as 94% of women who are victims of homicide are killed by a man that they know, 61% of them by an intimate partner or spouse, and most of them are more likely to die by gunfire than by anything else. The federal law does bar convicted abusers from owning a gun, but these federal laws are typically only enforced by federal officials, and legal questions are always surrounding which state offenses actually qualify under the federal law. And some states, like New Hampshire in recent years, have had no specific domestic violence laws in their books, making it very difficult to pin such offenses to gun ownership. There are also such gaps, such as the temporary protective order against such as those with temporary protective orders against them, are currently exempt from any gun-owning restrictions. Former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords warned recently that, quote, many of those who perpetuate violence against women are still allowed easy access to firearms. So now I'm going to open it up for discussion and leave it to you guys to discuss, but I will ask this, and you can answer it or not, but do you think this is purely a PR play on the NRA's part?
Well, I'm not exactly sure about that question. Is it a PR play? I don't really know. I'm not really going to speculate on that, but I do say that generally I'm in support. I mean, I don't think that people should, who do domestic violence, obviously they shouldn't have guns. But there is sort of a second argument, call it me playing devil's advocate, if you will. But I'm not sure, like, and this is arguing from a different perspective and a different side. I don't necessarily hold this view, but say that there are allegations of domestic violence that aren't proven. Should you be required to surrender your firearm anyway? And I'm not sure. Like, if you are somebody who's very pro-gun, that might be considered infringing on your freedom. I'm not entirely sure. But as for my personal sort of feelings on this, I don't think that if you're a domestic abuser, if you're or if you're accused of that, I think that's fine that you should surrender, even temporarily, your firearm, because as you pointed out, a lot of people, a lot of the murders and everything like that are people in domestic disputes, and they have guns. So I mean, it sort of makes sense to me, and I'm glad to see that Bobby Jindal is actually doing something right, and that the NRA is actually doing something like a little bit more sensible. And I don't really ever give any sort of credit to the NRA pretty much on anything. My stance on them. They've already won in their crazy gun, anti-gun control, anti-sensible law sort of stance. But to see them take a moderate stance on this issue, that's sort of a good thing. So I guess I'll give them a little bit of credit on that, to be fair.
I think a moderate stance on this issue actually makes the most sense, because in reality, the questions that arise when you take away somebody's guns after they get a restraining order are questions of due process, because a restraining order is not a conviction. It's usually you go before a judge, you file, you show some cause for the restraining order, and if you get it granted, which again is not crazy difficult, should that person lose part of their rights without going through the due process? So I don't think that it should be automatic, like you could never own a gun again if you get a restraining order, but maybe it could be temporary until the case is adjudicated in a court of law, or maybe, like, I mean, the easy question is if it's convicted of domestic violence. That's an easy one. I'm just talking about the restraining order. Because what if you're like, a woman files a restraining order against her ex-husband for whatever reason, right? And then the logical thing is that he'll file a counter restraining order just to file a counter restraining order. Should that woman, who was the original victim, lose her right to own a gun, which she would probably use for protection against him? Like, you get into murky questions of due process. So I think the moderate position of either temporarily losing your guns or not losing them until you're convicted is the most reasonable one here.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense, Sean. Sometimes I hate to say it, but sometimes in those questions you do make a little bit of sense.
That does make sense, and it's a fair comment, but it does specify that they are barring gun ownership from anyone presented with a domestic violence related restraining order. So there has to be some actual, at least preliminary evidence that there's abuse and violence involving the person who has a restraining order against them. And
so it seems like they have taken sort of a moderate stance on this one by saying that it's not just any restraining order, that it has to be sort of proven in that there's like some sort of probable cause to.
But it has to be. But even if it's like just a domestic violence restraining order, like I
Right.
don't think you should lose your rights permanently from that. Like I think you have
No,
to.
Oh, right, right,
it's not
definitely.
permanent with the restraining order. It's just for as long as the restraining order is in place.
Right. Or as long, or until the case is adjudicated. I think that those are like the reasonable compromises because you don't want you
Mhm.
don't want somebody to file a restraining order and then that person gets shot. Like to me, I think if you get convicted of domestic violence, it's easy one. If you violate the original restraining order, right, and like you're not supposed to show up within 1,000 feet or whatever the rule is, and you show up on his or her next doorstep, I think then you're done and you lose them. Like that's it. You violated the restraining order. Like, but I don't think just the act of an original restraining order should deprive you of your rights permanently. Definitely not. And temporarily, I'm a little wishy-washy on that. Like, I'm not sure.
I think temporarily, depending on the situation, and this goes back to what we were talking about yesterday, in a way of letting a judge, actually do his job and say, let there be a little bit of human judgment based on the situation. It just seems like it's a sensible sort of stance to let a judge be a judge.
Absolutely. And it's just wonderful that these sorts of things are happening in states like Louisiana, where you wouldn't normally think to find common sense gun laws go into place. So, and even if it is a PR stunt on the NRA's part in order to appeal to people who are possibly not supporting them as much as they used to because they don't like the NRA's tactics, because people are no longer willing to ignore the tragedy after gun tragedy that occurs within our society. It doesn't really matter as long as these laws are actually put into place.
Yeah, like if it's a PR stunt, like who cares? If they're actually doing the right thing for the wrong reasons, well, you know, and it's speculation on really their motive, whether or not it's a PR stunt or not. But even if they're doing the right thing for the wrong reasons, at least they're doing the right thing.
Right. And if it is a PR stunt, like, it's such an
Well
easy
played.
one. Like, your members are not going to, like, rebel against this PR stunt, so.
Like I said, well played, NRA, well played.
All right. With that, I'll move on to the next story. In the rich California city of Temecula, which is dotted with golf courses and vineyards, Mayor Marion Edwards has put into action a new plan to eliminate homelessness in her city. Now, she is quoted in saying that, quote, homeless people who are panhandling off the ramps are homeless by choice. They have rejected all forms of help and have instead chosen to play on the sympathy of generous residents. She also blames charitable people and said, quote, people will know that by giving food, money, or temporary housing to a homeless person, they are actually enabling that homeless person to continue to live in the creek and use heroin. However, in spite of this mayor's claims, according to a recent study, the vast majority, 94% of homeless people, say that they use the money that they receive from people primarily to buy food, and that less than a majority of them actually use any of that money for alcohol or drugs on a regular basis. The mayor's Responsible Compassion campaign, as it is called, is comprised of three main parts. The first part is allegedly about supplying more homeless services and temporary housing for the homeless. The second part of the plan is about increasing, quote, surveillance and inspections of areas typically occupied by homeless people or transients, with new ordinances also going into place outlawing things like panhandling. And finally, the third step is a public awareness campaign, which would be admonishing anyone who gives to the poor, claiming that they are perpetuating the homeless problem. Edwards doesn't want to actually spend any taxpayer dollars on implementing these plans for increased housing and services for the homeless, however. Instead, they are planning to rely entirely on volunteers and charitable organizations funded completely by private donations. Considering how rich a community this is, and considering that there are only an estimated 80 homeless individuals within city limits, it would be more than possible to eliminate homelessness in this city without actually criminalizing homelessness in the process. But when the mayor was asked if she collaborated with any homeless individuals in her plans for the future of the city, she said no, that she just used common sense. So what do you guys think? Is this actually going to help or hurt the homeless?
Go ahead, Sean.
I don't know. I don't know how much it's gonna hurt the homeless. Like I know, like they're still gonna panhandle, right? And they're going to. I mean, they'll get ticketed and all that, but they will probably not pay the tickets. I'm like just keeping it real. They don't usually pay the tickets, and then they go to jail for a little while. Like my friend's a cop, and he tells me like the first day of the month they write the tickets to the homeless people, and then the last day of the month they have to go pick them up and send them to jail for like 15 days because they didn't pay the ticket or whatever. So like I don't know if it's gonna change a lot for them, but it seems it's very insensitive, obviously, what she's saying, and I understand certain parts of what she's saying, that it's better to give to organizations than to give to people on the street, right? In general, like there's like studies to back up that charities do a better job and all that, but like don't like the people who are giving to the homeless on the street, it comes from a good place. Like she's kind of talking down to the people who give to the homeless and to the homeless when she should be saying, look, give in a better way. Like in a more, this way is proven more effective. Maybe you should give in that way. Like try and convince people to do better instead of like just like calling everybody horrible people and saying that they're all just, you know, cheating the system or whatever.
And for me, you're not going to hurt the homeless people more because there's not really like they're already homeless. They're already in one of the worst situations that you could find yourself in. You know, other than being, of course, put in jail for being homeless, which
Right,
often
that
happens
could make the
all the time.
situation worse. That could
That's what
make
I'm
the
saying.
situation worse. Of course,
There's not much more you can do to hurt homeless people, other than just that. And so, I mean, as far as the huge impact, obviously it's not going to help the homeless people, and there's not much more that you can do to hurt them. Basically, as Sean says, they're still going to, you know, try and panhandle, and people are still going to try to help them because, you know, people are good people, and I definitely think that it's incredibly callous for that mayor to sit there and say that, oh, they're just going to sit there and go in the river and do heroin, and you know, and you're enabling that. How do you know? How do you know? For one, yes, there are some homeless people who will self-medicate because they're freaking homeless. What do you expect them to do, right? And they need help, and you know, not to basically what she's doing is saying that's your problem. If you're homeless, that's your fault. I don't really care about you. Don't help these people. What would really be effective is if they were to shift a couple of tax dollars their way, and open up like an ad campaign of saying, if you really want to help these people around the area, maybe you should let's set up these charitable organizations and use some of our tax money as well to actually try to fix the problem instead of just saying, no, don't feed the animals. Because that's essentially what you're calling them.
And there's one thing I want to add is that some of these people, like, we've actually changed our laws to be less strict on panhandling over the years. Because some of these...
It depends on where you are.
No, but the reason why is not out of kindness to the homeless. It's because some of the homeless are in such dire straits that when they get sent to jail, 3 square meals a day and walls around them, like sometimes that's a better option for them. Like it's a horrible option, but I'm just saying you're comparing 2 horrible situations. So we've actually changed laws against panhandling so they don't end up in jail because that's a drain on the taxpayer. Why don't you, instead of creating a jail cell and paying all these security guards, maybe have a shelter that's not horrible? Like, homeless people are scared to death to go to shelters because they get their stuff stolen. There's not enough beds. There's like all these restrictions. Maybe like try and work with a local shelter or something like that. But you're really going backwards to where you got now that the laws against panhandling got more lenient.
Right. I
Uh,
was just thinking that in this rich, very affluent community, I don't think it would take very much of their tax dollars or their private donations, take both of them combined, and all they'd have to do is make a relatively small, low income um, apartment complex.
are
For
you
80
kidding?
people. It's 80 people. If you have 80 people that are homeless in an entire city, I mean, that should be, you should consider yourself freaking lucky, and just take care of the situation, build a building, put 80 small, 1 or 2 bedroom apartments in there, and house these people and give them a place, a rock to stand on to lift themselves out of the muck.
But there's that mindset too that gets in the way of that. And for one, once again, the governor is perpetuating the fallacy that, oh, they're all, they did this themselves. They rejected all the help. So yes, because there's generous, copious amounts of help out there. Uh, no, there actually isn't. In some places there are, but not necessarily in this area. I don't know what kind of programs they offer in this area, but it just seems like they're blaming homeless people for once again for being homeless, and that's really once again
And
it's ridiculous.
and it depends on how you come at the situation, right? Because we've been over this before. Most people don't like to look at homeless people. Like that's just a general thing in this country. We don't like to look at people who are in like that bad of a situation, right? Like it
Mm-hmm.
sounds horrible. I'm not saying I'm one of those people, but like that's the reality. So if she came at it and said, "Look, a lot of these people are rejecting help from shelters," which is true, right? A lot of homeless people don't want to go to shelters. Maybe I should look into what's going on at the shelter and try and make it more accommodating. Because if they're not going to use those services, then those services are actually going to waste. Like
That's a
they're
very good point. Like there are
Mhm.
legitimate, like you said earlier, there are legitimate reasons for them not to want to go to the shelters. Some shelters, like we did a story about Tampa, Florida, some shelters actually charge up to $50 a night in order to allow someone to stay there. Some shelters are just, disgusting.
shelters, which is true, right? A lot of
Yeah, you get things stolen from you, taken from you. There are fights, diseases, not enough beds, lice. It's just, they'd rather stay on the street. They don't consider themselves much better off in the shelter. So, especially if they have to pay, where are they going to get the money to pay for a shelter? If they could pay for a shelter, then they could pay for a hotel room.
Right, and that's true. Like a lot of people don't believe that some shelters out there actually charge you to stay there. We have a viewer, who used to comment a lot on our videos and watch our videos a lot, who was homeless, and so he would watch us on the phone, and he would send us, you know, basically updates on his job search. He's disabled and stuff, and he would tell me about some of the terrible conditions in some of these shelters and the very, very restrictive draconian rules for being in there. So the shelters aren't exactly the best places to stay. They're cramped. There's no privacy. Uh, you know, in this particular place, you would have to because you couldn't go downtown. You'd have to get bused somewhere else, and then you have to be in by 8 o'clock and everything like that. So those shelters aren't exactly the greatest places to stay, and especially if you're being charged, man, it wouldn't surprise me to see that like some of these people would be like, I've been there, those places are terrible, I'd rather sleep out in my car.
Right. All
and
right.
and and
Go
to
ahead.
pretend these people like aren't like even if they're not looking for a particular job, to pretend that their life isn't difficult. Like I see homeless people all the time. Every time you put out recyclables, they come and collect all of them to get a nickel per bottle. Like to pretend that these guys aren't trying to get some kind of money on their own, and that like we should restrict every means of money to kind of force them into places. Like that's crazy to me. Like I see that guy like taking my recyclables, and I think A, thank you because I'm a jerk, and B, I feel bad for him. So like I don't understand like the hatred for homeless people.
I know. Me neither. But it seems to be a growing trend in this country, criminalizing homelessness and what
Well,
homeless
it's
people have to do in
it's
order to.
blaming that it's blaming the victim mentality once again, and it's also to get back to your point of like building an apartment complex, a low income in a very very ritzy neighborhood, don't you think that there with the mindset there that there'd be a huge backlash against that? Oh my God, I can't believe you're doing that. You're going to lower my property values.
Of
Because
course.
that's the mindset of people like that, especially if it's in a very fancy area. So I think, it's going to be one of those things where Sean is absolutely right. People don't want to look at homeless people, and they're just like, let's get them out of here. Let's figure out a way. Let's make them, as Mitt Romney said about immigrants. Let's make them self-deport. Let's make it
And
so bad for them they just want to leave.
and to be fair, criminalizing homelessness might work. Remember when we criminalized drug use and all the addicts disappeared?
Oh, yeah, right. Exactly, that's what happened.
Good one, Sean. All right,
Nailed
with
it.
that, third story of the evening.
Forward.
Currently in the U.S., federal minimum wage is only $7.25 an hour, which is little over $15,000 a year before taxes, at full time, if you don't take any sick days at all, ever. However, if you get tipped at your job, you could be making a base pay as low as $2.13 an hour. Something that not everyone knows, but that is actually the legal federal minimum wage for tipped employees in America. Even in states and cities that have a higher base pay for tipped employees, like in one of the most expensive cities in America, New York City, they're still only paid $5 an hour base pay. However, a new trend is taking place in a number of restaurants which are eliminating tipping altogether, and instead they choose to pay their employees a higher wage. Notices at the New York City restaurant, Ricky's Restaurant, state that tipping is not required nor expected. Now, this may sound good, but I have a couple issues with it. The cost of paying the servers more is actually being reflected in the cost of the food. Tips are factored into the menu prices now. Restaurant owners are calling this an attempt to protect workers from stingy tippers and unreliable wages. Fair enough. I agree that those are serious problems. However, my problem with this is two main things. First of all, most of these restaurants are already pretty upscale and successful, so they claim. So why are they not absorbing any of the cost? Instead, they're passing it all on to the customer. And my second issue with this is why not simply give the waitstaff a higher wage, no matter how you offset the cost? Why not just give them the higher wage and not discourage tipping? Why not just say nothing at all and let them continue to get tipped? Several restaurants, including the Pizza Hut, where I used to work at in Florida, of all things, I have to give them credit for at least paying their tipped employees standard minimum wage, even though they didn't have to. There is also the question of how much more these waiters and waitresses and other tipped employees are going to get paid, and if it's going to be enough to actually cover their living expenses, because these restaurants are under no legal obligation to pay them any particular amount over $2.13. But here are some numbers for you just to keep in mind that $7.25 has been the minimum wage since 2007. It has not changed since then. However, since 1978, CEO compensation has increased by 725%. $10.86 an hour is what wages would be if they had kept up with the rate of inflation over the last 40 years. But $21.72 an hour is what wages would be if they had kept up with worker productivity since 1968. $16.62 is the average wage estimated in this country needed to support one person. $32 an hour and 19 cents is needed estimated for the average one adult with two children. $2.13 an hour is, like I said, the tipped employee base pay, but $5,915,186 is the average net worth of senators who blocked a vote to raise minimum wage in Congress. So, now I'll open it up for discussion. Is this a good thing or a bad thing for tipped employees?
Bad. Tipped employees actually, like, in a lot of these cases actually come out against the higher wage versus the tip, because a lot of times they make more money on the tip than they do on their general wage. And I don't know how often you guys go out to eat, but I've been going out to eat more and more frequently, and usually the waiter or waitress is working 3 tables at the same time, and in a time of about 20 to 30 minutes or 40 minutes, however long it takes people to eat, they'll make tips on 3 to 4 tables, and that will definitely add up to more than the $5 gap between 213 and 725. So if the tipped employees are coming out against it normally, like I'm sure they get stiff from time to time, and we hear a lot of stories about that, then maybe like this is just a way for the owners of the restaurant to get in on the tip action by incorporating it into the price, but not letting their servers get it.
Good point.
Yeah,
Jeff, what do you
yeah.
think?
I'm sort of mixed on this. I've never worked for tips, so let me just put that out there. And so my statements might come off as like, yeah, but you don't know what you're talking about, and you'd be absolutely right. But for me, like, I think, I don't know. Like I said, I'm torn on this, but I would think that this would be a good thing, because then at least you're guaranteeing them that they would know how much they would make. But Sean brings up a great point. Like, sometimes these tip workers do make out better, but it's not all the time. And so it seems like it's rather random. And I mean, let's talk about a little bit of why it's $2.13 an hour, or like $2.30 or $2.13 an hour for tip workers. It's because of massive, massive lobbying by the restaurant industry. Of course, they don't want to pay higher wages, and of course, like, they're going to go and buy Congress so that they can pay their workers $2.13 an hour, and then justify it by saying, well, look how much money they're going to get in tips. Well, and they might get more because people are generous and people know that these people work for $2.13 an hour. Or, when I go out to eat, for example, I leave tips, right? I make sure, even if the service is kind of crappy, I still leave a tip, because, like, well, even if it's, crappy service, this person has to eat, so, like, I get it, right? And so, I guess my point is, I'm sort of rambling about this. I'm really mixed on that. I'm not sure if this is a great idea, but I would support it if it was a little bit more than just $7.25, and it's the federal minimum wage. But I think that overall, I would agree that we need to raise the minimum wage for everybody.
Yeah, I'm gonna throw out a little anecdotes, because New York City was mentioned in there, and that's one of the places where a lot of the restaurateurs are raising the prices and encouraging people not to tip. Like, I was at a wedding of between a nurse and a New York City waiter, and the New York City waiter made more than the nurse because he worked in a super high-end Manhattan restaurant. Like, those people get tipped a ton. Like, the food is overpriced, and if people tip that 15 to 20%, it's ridiculous. So, like, I think a lot of this is owners some waiters are definitely getting cheated. Like, that's definitely a thing that's definitely out there. But
Right, and not everybody works at those high-end restaurants.
But I'm saying in Manhattan,
where
where these people are raising the wages and the waiters are rebelling, it's because they're they're trying to get in on that money that the waiters and the wait staff is getting. And
right,
like,
well, like, if you could step back and look at sort of the macro picture on this, is it a majority of wait staff that's
I think it is a majority. I think it is a majority of wait staff that makes more than the minimum wage based on their tips. Like John Adirola on the Young Turks, when they were discussing this on the main show, John Adirola was against this when he used to be a waiter, and he was a waiter in Texas.
Right.
I would be against this too. You see, I think it's a bad idea, because I know from experience, living in Florida, for example, we lived in a very high tourism area. That means that most of the jobs that were available that didn't involve some sort of higher education were restaurant jobs. And those people who got the tip jobs, they scrambled for the tip jobs. Everyone wanted the tip jobs, because even if they did pay only $2.13 an hour or $5 an hour, they knew they were going to make a lot more in tips than the person working in the back washing the dishes working for minimum wage was going to make. always, every single time, even if they got stiffed. So yeah, I think this is, I think Sean has a really good point. I think this is a way for restaurants to kind of get in on that action a little bit. And I also think that this is going to discourage people from supporting higher wages because they're going to see these vast increases in the price of their food too, which is not necessary, especially for multi-chain restaurants. They can afford to just take a little bit, they can take a less, $2 million less in their multi-million-dollar bonus once a year and frickin' just absorb the cost, but they're not going to do that because they're greedy. And I think that what they should do is what Washington State is in the process of doing, which is eliminating the tipped versus non-tipped pay gap, making it one minimum wage and not discourage tipping. Because if I walked into one of those establishments that discouraged tipping, I'd tip anyway. I think that they deserve a fair minimum wage and tips. That's
when it
a
comes
long
down to it, I
ages
think
long benefit of being a server is that you get tips.
Look,
right. I think
I don't
when it
want
comes
to. I
down
don't want
to
to.
it.
I don't want to down on servers or anything, but like the tips do cover the gap. Like there is a reason why they make a lower technical wage because the tips do cover the gap. So I don't like if I'm and restaurants tend to have like razor thin profit margins. So like it is a sensible model. Like and I think that the reason that these restaurateurs are trying to raise their wage and discourage tipping is to kind of like get at their money or save money or something. Like it's not that these waiters and waitresses are struggling. It's that these waiters and waitresses are making money that your restaurant owner would rather go into his pocket. Like that's why tipping schemes like where they take your tips are illegal is because waiters like restaurant owners tend to like try and get at your tips. And that's why tips are like protected income and they don't let your boss get even a percentage of it. So like I would kind of leave things the way they are. If you wanted to bump it up in your particular state because of cost of living, like to like a little higher, which some states do have it higher than that 213, like that makes sense. But like for the most part, these people are working at a higher than minimum wage with the with when tips are included, and most and like
Well,
even
look, I don't see what the problem with doing Ree's suggestion is.
but you're
Why
gonna
not have
but
them
a
actually
lot of
make the
restaurants
private
might not
minimum
be able
wage
to
and
stay
have them-
afloat if you do that,
Well, it all depends.
and you're gonna get the price increase anyway.
Well, no matter what, I think they're going to try and increase your prices because that's sort of how they do things. Like
That's not true.
a business is there to make money.
Restaurant owners do anything in their possibility to not raise prices because
Of
it's
course.
like an old restaurant saying is you don't ever chase revenue by raising prices. Like they'll change the menu, they'll go in a completely different direction before they'll raise prices. They like really try not to do that.
But when it comes down to the end of the day, the purpose of a business is to make as much money as possible as well. So, I mean,
What I'm saying is
I'm just saying, like, I would support anything that benefits the workers because we know that, and the problem with minimum wage and tipped wait staff as well is that no matter what, you're not making enough to survive. And I guess even if it's the wrong approach, you can kind of see that this might come from at least supporters
the
that.
thing is I don't think it's particularly an unfair arrangement. Like your average waiter and waitress, and I'm sure you can look this up, makes more than the minimum wage. Like
I
on
said, I
average-
haven't worked. I haven't worked as a waiter or a waitress, so like if anybody has in the audience,
I mean, I
feel
have
free
an
to correct me, 'cause
anecdote.
just
I have
don't
an
know.
anecdote that I don't want to throw in because I don't think it's really that great. But I bagged groceries for a couple of days, and I made like just for tips, no wage, and I made like $80 each day on average. So like, and it was like for 3 or 4 hours. So like, people are generous when you tip. Like people are generous when they tip, and all those tips do add up. Like I wouldn't tax them the way we tax tips, but like that's a whole other issue. I just don't think it's an inherently unfair arrangement the way it is now.
Actually, let me correct myself. I actually have worked as a tipped worker. Um, when I was back in high school, I worked at a conservation club, and I was actually making minimum wage plus tips, which was back then it was like five something. So, blast from the freaking past. You know what I mean? So I was making minimum wage plus tips, just what Ree was saying, and I did fairly well. You still were incentivized to go after the tips.
Right. Absolutely. And the thing is that even when the workers that I worked with at Pizza Hut who were making the basic regular 7.25 minimum wage, who were also getting tips, they still didn't make enough to live comfortably and not have to worry paycheck to paycheck about whether or not they were going to be able to eat or afford to pay their bills. So it's not too much to ask to just set the federal minimum wage for everyone at a certain amount and just let tip people get tipped. I think it would be nice to encourage tipping anywhere and everywhere that you can afford it. I don't know where you were working, Sean, but around here and back in Florida, in Ohio, nobody tips their bag boys.
Right.
So
And
Yeah, I've
that's
never
the reason
heard
I
of
didn't
that.
want to mention that is because I was young at the time, like really young. So that's an anecdote, and I didn't want to mention that. But I don't even have a bag boy anymore. Like I bag my own groceries now when I go to the grocery store. They don't even help. They just let everything pile up and look at it. Like I'm like, all right, but yeah, the thing is I don't think it's inherently an unfair arrangement. What I will caution, and I actually do this as a consumer, is I actually look up places' tipping policies to find out if they let the individual server get the tip, or if they try and pool them together and divide them evenly at the end of the night. And I go to the ones where they let the individual get it.
yeah,
I think you get better service there, and I think like if you put it in a pile and then divide it evenly, I think the boss is taking a cut somewhere on there. Like that's just my
it's
conspiracy theory,
also
if you
not
will.
fair because better servers get gypped. Like
Hmm.
if you get a $50 tip from some really generous person one night, you don't want to freaking split that with everyone. You lucked out. You keep it.
And the only person you should split it with, and again, this is like restaurant industry stuff, is the busboy that helps you out. Like they get like 20%.
Oh yeah, sure, of course. But anyway, with that, I want to move to our last story for the evening. Fox News host Tucker Carlson believes that men are out of touch with their masculinity and that the modern man is currently in crisis. He says, quote, part of it is that somebody told boys when they were little, be sensitive, be thoughtful. And some of that's fine, but too much of it makes you pretty unattractive to women because it suggests weakness. This statement is infuriating because this asshole is equating sensitivity with femininity and then femininity with weakness. If you're sweet and sensitive, then you're a wuss. You're a girly man. Or even worse, you're a pussy. You notice that all of the most insulting words that you can throw at a man basically call him a woman? And the people that should be most offended by this are women. But he doesn't stop there. Mr. Manly Man goes on to explain that this is the reason why there are so many attractive, intelligent women in their 30s who desperately want to get married but never do. There are just too many, quote, losers out there who won't, quote, live up to their manly responsibility to provide. See, he equates being masculine with taking responsibility in life. I guess every woman who takes responsibility in her life is a man now. But one of the brilliant co-hosts at this point pipes in, apparent high school graduate Katie Pavlik, says, quote, I blame it on the feminist movement for decades has told men not to embrace their manliness, and that it is part of the patriarchy of our society, and that being a man is a bad thing, and that you should downgrade your manliness. And saying man up is like not acceptable because manning up is like not based on gender. Newsflash, Katie, it's actually not based on gender. Here's another newsflash, Katie. Without that feminist movement you're talking about, you wouldn't be able to sit in your comfy little chair and call yourself a quote-unquote journalist or news anchor right now. Anyway, back to Carlson, who also said in the same segment, being masculine means taking responsibility. That's a quote. Again, equating taking responsibility with being a man. That's insulting to men and women, in my opinion. He also said, quote, men who on the second date let their date pay for dinner, I'm sorry, that's disgusting. I don't care what the new norms are, he shouldn't allow it, period. Then co-host, when reasonable, seemingly, co-host Sandra Smith tried to point out that maybe the man just could have respect for the woman and not assume that he's the macho man that needs to pay for dinner all the time, Carlson exclaimed, "He should be the macho man. He ought to have respect for himself. Are you kidding? Let a girl pay? What, are you joking?" People like Carlson equate weakness with femininity. These two words are synonyms in their mind. What is feminine is weak. Accepting help or money from a woman is accepting help from something that is weak, which by dint makes you weak as well, which of course isn't manly. But you know what it means to be a man, Carlson? You know what it really means to be a man? It means you have a penis. Or at least that you feel that you should have been born with one, not leaving out my transsexual friends out there. That's what it means to be a man. Do you know what it means to take responsibility? That's not a masculine trait. That's a responsible human trait. That is what every responsible human being should do, whether man or woman. Take responsibility for their own lives. And when you try to constrain and confine men and women into these ridiculous stereotypes of what it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman, you're harming men, you're harming women, and you're harming the progress of our society. Anyway, he also said in the last segment, I have to point out, quote, "If you're playing video games in your 30s, you're pathetic." So there you go, Jeff. He called you pathetic. So I'm going to leave it to you guys now. I've said my piece. How do you guys feel about this particular asshole?
Oh,
Hey, Tucker. Fuck off. You're an asshole. Look, this guy's a douchebag. Like, we all know this, right? Like, nobody's going to sit here and defend Tucker Carlson completely. At least I won't, because this guy's a douchebag, right? And you know, the things that you said about, you know, like him, you know, equating femininity with, you know, weakness, that's ridiculous. Like, manning up and stuff like that, like, I don't have any problem with saying that, really. I just think that, like, taking responsibility is a thing that everybody should learn to do, whether you're a man or a woman. And so, like, it really doesn't, like, he doesn't make any sense. It's like this guy belongs back in the 1950s, and saying that, like, you know, people who let their date pay on the second date or something pay is disgusting. And what the fuck? I think I like, personally, I think that whoever asks the other person out on the date should pay. Like, if I ask a girl out, I'll pay. If a girl asks me out, she pays. Like, that's fine with me. Like, I don't really care. Because it's just not a big deal to me. So I think Tucker Carlson's being kind of a 1950s Neanderthal, which fits perfectly into his position over at Fox News, because their audience is like 68 anyway, like the average age.
Right, and I also have to point out I have to point out that when he said that that one of the problems is that we're telling little boys to be sweet and sensitive, and too much of that makes you pretty unattractive to women. I'd just like to ask, has any woman actually ever genuinely found this guy attractive? I mean, what exactly does he think he has to say on what he thinks women find attractive?
Yeah, you know, to be honest about this, and I'm going to let you go here, Sean. The thing that offended me the most was the video game comment. I'm going to be real about it. Like, I'm like, all right, you can say whatever you want about, like, guys being sensitive, because I consider myself a sensitive, good guy, right? But don't fuck with my video games, you fucking asshole.
Yeah.
Like, fuck off.
You see, I 100% agree with Tucker Carlson. We should all be men and not ever wear makeup, even when we're on Oh, wait a minute.
Oh, shit.
Tucker, why are you wearing makeup? No, but in all seriousness, the be a man analogy, like, I don't think that's necessarily that bad, but it depends on the context. If in context you're saying, like, don't be a boy, like, you know, grow up and be a responsible person. If you're comparing...
Take responsibility for yourself. Yeah.
Right. If you're comparing manhood to, like, boyhood, for lack of a better term, I think that's a perfectly fine analogy. But if you're comparing manhood to like being like a womanhood and saying that womanhood is not about responsibility and all those same things, then I think you're wrong. Obviously, Tucker Carlson fell into the second category, in the wrong category.
Right.
Now, in general, like, I might not disagree. Like, if I'm on a date with a woman, I usually pay, right? Sometimes she'll offer to buy a round of drinks or offer to pay the tip or whatever, and to me that's perfectly fine. I don't feel like denigrated as a man in any way. Most recently, I met a girl who would refuse to let me pay, and again, like, I didn't think I was like not a man because she would refuse to let me pay anything for her. Like, it depends on the situation. Like, like I assume that I have to pay because I assume that they assume that I am gonna pay. So, like, it just depends on the situation. But like, I'm not like less of a person. I don't think less of myself because of the most recent person that I met that she won't let me pay. I'm like, whatever. If she wants to show that she's independent, I totally respect that. That's perfectly fine. It's Tucker Carlson who has the weird issue. He's like, oh, if I'm not paying, I might not be worth anything. Like, he's valuing himself.
Exactly. That's what I was just going to point out. He feels like if that he's not paying, that he's like somehow less of a man. Right? No, I gotta pay. Right? That's what makes me feel like a man. Like, it just seems like Tucker Carlson is just this emasculated, person who like is not at all comfortable with his sexuality, or he might be gay.
Right.
But all you have to do, like, honestly, like, it's not about who pays or who's more manly or anything like that. In general, women do like confidence, and if your like confidence is destroyed the minute a woman wants to pay, then maybe that is a very sad day for you.
Yeah,
like, if your confidence is being destroyed by somebody wanting to do something nice for you and be like offering like, oh hey, let me pay for this meal. You want to? Sure thing. Okay. Well, I'm not going to turn down free food, and it's not going to destroy my confidence. Like, I just don't get the mindset of people that are like, no, I have to do so, or else I will not feel like a man. Like,
right. And in the scenario he's presenting at one point, where it's like if you let your date pay on the second date, then that's disgusting. And he says that you shouldn't allow it, no matter what. It's like, well, that's a great way to get a third date, isn't it? Act like a male chauvinist asshole and refuse, no matter how insistent she is, that you don't pay for her. Just you pay for it, no matter what she says. You force it on her, damn it.
Well, let's be honest. Like if she offers, I might do a little back and forth. Like, oh, you sure? No, I can cover this. If that's all right. Like,
Jeff's exactly right.
It goes back to me, like, to me personally. Like, if I ask a girl out on a date, which I did for now my wife, right? I asked her out, and she basically volunteered her time. That's the way that I kind of look at it. Like, I'm the one who made the proposition to her. I'm the one who asked, which means I'm asking for her time, which means it's my responsibility to pay since I'm doing the asking, right? And that's more of like that's not like a feminist or an anti-feminist thing or a chauvinist thing. That's a common courtesy sort of thing. Like, I ask you for your time, I'm going to pay for that time because that's my treat for asking you. I want you to do something with me, so I'm gonna treat us both to it.
But Jeff's exactly right. I'll do the same thing if I'm on a date and she offers to pay. I check. Like, I'll be like, are you sure? I got it. Don't worry about it. You check if like she's actually being serious, because she could be testing you. She could be the Tucker Carlson kind of woman who never wants to have to pay anything ever. And like, so like, you check. But like, in general, like, if you're gonna insist, I'm not gonna be like, no, you're like, I'm not gonna like fight you and have an argument. Like, it's ridiculous. Like, what am I gonna win if like you totally object to being paid for, and then I make you let me pay? I make you let me pay for you. I'm never gonna see you again. Like, after that,
and you're probably out like $20.
If you get so put off, then you're just like, I'm just offering to pay to never see you again.
Right.
It's just ridiculous. Like, just feel comfortable. Like, try and negotiate. Like, in general, like, if you want to pay and that makes you feel like a good person, and she insists on paying, then just work it out. Like, you could do. I had a nice arrangement with somebody a long time ago that she would leave the tip or something like that, or one time, and then on another date she would pay for the entire date or something like that. Like we would work it out, and I never felt like emasculated or anything like that, or like like not a real man or whatever. Like just
Right.
you're on a date with a person, right? Like hopefully a person that you see as equivalent to you. Like if you want to pay, that's nice, but it's not necessary.
Right,
And
but that's
to,
the
to
thing. I think
continue
it's
on
really
that,
hard for a lot of men and a lot of women to interact with someone of the opposite sex as if they're another human being, instead of, you know, I mean, because it's these social conventions, these gender stratification issues that really make it difficult for people to interact as human to human. But
well, I would hope, like you would hope that a person that you would like want to go out with, that you actually want to spend time with them because you think that they're an interesting person or you would like to get to know something about them, not like anything else. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like
And
you would think.
Jeff,
Maybe I'm being
and
an idealist.
And look, here's my rule for all men out there who are asking women on dates. Assume that you're gonna end up paying. So that means bring enough money, because the worst thing you want to ever have happen is to be broke. So bring enough money. But if she insists or she wants to split it or whatever, right? Then just split it. Like don't make it a huge issue, because
Don't tie your shoelace to it.
Jeff's rule's nice that
Throwing your manhood into that kind of stuff because I think that this is ridiculous. Like,
But Jeff's rule is nice that if she asks for the date, then whoever asked for the date should pay for it. That's nice, but that's not always reality. I went on a date once where I was actually asked out by the girl, and every time the check came, we went to two different places. She ran into the bathroom. So like sometimes I say as a dude, assume that you're gonna end up paying, but if she wants to pay, don't feel emasculated or anything like that. It's perfectly fine. It's actually nice. I actually appreciate the offer.
yeah, it seems like a good backup plan, actually, Sean. So,
Right.
right,
yeah,
if you're a confident man, which is important, then your masculinity shouldn't be tied to money anyway.
And I'm downright narcissistic, so like nothing you can do will shake my confidence.
right. Like confidence, it's not like being like super macho manly. It's about having confidence, and that's what's really attractive. I don't think Tucker Carlson fucking gets it. Tucker Carlson thinks that you got to fucking take your club and beat a girl over the head with it. Shows that I'm a big man. That's how to be manly. No, being manly is being confident of yourself. Not necessarily like super cocky or anything like that, but confident in yourself, respectful. You know what I mean? Like respect goes such a long way when it comes to dating, treating the person that you're spending time with like you actually want to spend time with them and you actually value them as a person. Like, hey, I want to get to know you, because you seem like an interesting person. That goes so far, and that just shows how much of a Neanderthal Tucker Carlson is and his audience because they're buying into that bullshit. And I don't agree with it. He's an
And,
idiot.
and by the way, it's super easy for Tucker Carlson to say because he's also super rich. Like you also got to factor that in. Like
That is another good point.
he's super rich, so he could literally pay for any date easily. So like it's easy for him to say I'm super rich and I'm on TV, so I know exactly how dating should go. I'm like, dude, let's see you without all your money. Let's see you with my kind of money and no kind of TV show. Let's see how you roll like that.
Yep.
Right?
Maybe that
money's
guy
all-
would change his.
Sorry. Yeah, money's all he's got going for him. So
And once again, Tucker Carlson, you can fuck off. You can literally sit on this thing and spin for that video game comment. You are a dick. Am I clear?
Yeah.
all right. And with that, I'm going to say thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight on TYT Community. Thank you for watching. It's been such a great night. And I'm going to throw it over to Jeff to hand you all the plugs that he needs to.
Well, I was originally going to let you do that, but I did want to do, before I forget, I wanted to do a couple of patron shout-outs, which I tend to forget to do. And actually, I want to welcome one of our newest patrons, Jules Frazier, who's newest patron. Thank you guys so much for donating, being a member of TYT Community. You know, we want to keep bringing you like great shows twice a week, and maybe expand it beyond at some certain point in the in the far future. Just thank you so much, guys, for being patrons. You know, and this goes to you, Ryan Jacob Smith, Christopher Keith Brown. Thank you guys for being supporters. Jules, you're awesome. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And of course, if any of you who are not patrons are interested in becoming patrons now or sometime in the far off future, you know, if you guys really like the show and like the direction we're going, go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/TYTNation. Um, I guess a couple other plugs while I'm at it. Facebook page, facebook.com/TYTNation, and Twitter at TYT Community and at Jeff Politics. So that's pretty much all the plugs that I had to have. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to tune in, of course, next week on TYT Community's The News and Politics Hour, hosted by me, with our awesome panel, Jordan, Steven, Sean, and maybe some other guests, maybe some special guests. We're going to arrange to get some more of those. So make sure to stay tuned. And of course, come here next week for the Social Justice Hour, hosted by the lovely and talented Rhiannon Avenue. Thank you so much for hosting tonight. I really appreciate that.
Thank you very much for having me.
Hey, Jeff, how do new panelists get on the show?
That is an excellent question, Sean. You can go to our Facebook page and post that you're interested in being part of the show. And you can also email me, jeffw@tytnetwork.com. We're always looking for more panelists. You know, it doesn't matter who you are. If you got some ideas, if you want to have a voice on this show, if you want to hang out with us for an hour and just talk politics and shit, please, you know, let us know. You know, we'd love to have you guys on the show. So we really appreciate it. And if you guys don't want to be on the show and just want to watch, that's awesome too. So we really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for being a part of the TYT community. That's really all I've got today. I could go and you know, we can close out the show. So we'll see you guys next week. You guys have a fantastic weekend. Sean, you guys take it easy too. Have a great weekend.
You too.
We'll be back next week. Everybody say bye.
Boy!
Bye.
Bye.